So we've talked a little bit about species. Again, these are organisms that can breed with one another and make viable offspring. And there's one type of species called invasive species. Now, invasive species were one of our threats to biodiversity based on how they act in the ecosystem. So what is an invasive species? Well, it's probably good to know what is a regular species or a non-invasive species. So it can categorize organisms into 3 different types of species. First one is native. Native just meaning that plant or that animal or bacteria or whatever originated from that area. You know, the polar bear has always been in the Arctic. It's always been there. It's never been anywhere else. It's considered a native species. We then have non-native species or introduced species. These are species that have been moved by us. And it can happen naturally. I can't really think of an instance, but I'm sure it exists. But these are humans who have moved organisms from one area to another area. Sometimes it's on purpose, and we'll talk about some of those times. And sometimes it's on accident. They didn't mean to do that. And then finally, we have our invasive species. So all invasive species are non-native, but they're causing harm. So just because, this organism wasn't naturally in this ecosystem, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll become invasive. And invasive is just anything that's been introduced that is causing harm to that ecosystem, to another species, to something. It's doing something harmful. Now again, I want to point out that just because it's non-native or an introduced species doesn't necessarily mean it's invasive. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. In the United States, we have about 7,000 species that are not from the United States. Only about 1,000 of those are invasive. One example here is the honeybee. The honeybee was purposefully brought over from Europe to help with pollination with our crops. If we didn't have these honeybees, pollination would be at much lower rates and we wouldn't have the food production that we have. It doesn't harm our native species at all. They coexist, they don't feed on the same things, so it works. But there are some invasives or some non-native that are invasive and have detrimental effects to the ecosystem. We're going to talk about a couple of those examples. Now, what makes an invasive invasive? How do we go from a non-native that just coexists to something that doesn't? Well, for some invasive species in their new habitat, so let's say it is a fish that was from Japan and now it's the United States, depending on the type of fish, it might not have any enemies. The predatory animals that live here might not feed on it. It doesn't know what it is. They don't like it. They don't maybe have a defense mechanism. They don't know how to kill it. So might not have predators. Therefore, the invasive species can grow really, really quickly and population kind of explodes. Maybe there's no competitors. Maybe they're really good at getting food first and the fastest and the earliest. They might not have or be exposed to diseases or parasites that they usually see back in their native land. Sometimes what will also help is they have a high reproductive rate, especially if you don't have enemies and you can make a whole bunch of babies. Like, the natives are screwed. They're just going to be overnumbered by this species. Most of them are generalists, meaning they can eat everything. Sure, they're in a new habitat and this is all foreign food, but if they're a generalist, they probably don't even care. They just want to eat. Sometimes they're pioneer species, so pioneer meaning like the first one to an area. Think more of grasses or maybe like small fish. If they're usually the first ones there, but then they have no competition, they can take over an ecosystem pretty easily. And lastly, some of them can be long-lived. The longer you live, especially with these others, so coupled with some of these other characteristics, that could result in you being a better competitor or having no predators for a very long time. During your lifetime, you're reproducing a lot. So kind of a recipe for disaster. So one example is the lionfish. You've probably seen these in an aquarium. Some people have them in their fish tank. These guys, incredibly venomous. All of these spikes in their fins, so on their dorsal fin as well as their pectoral or their like swimming fins, all of those spines have a venom in them. This was an Asian fish that is now along the east coast of the United States, as well as in the Caribbean. Because they're venomous, there is no predator here on the east coast that can tolerate eating them. Out in Asia, there's plenty of predators, but not here. So these guys don't have any predators. The other problem is they're also a generalist. They eat about 30 different species of fish, like along the east coast. So they just eat and eat and eat, and nothing eats them. It started with only maybe 3 or 4 lionfish. We don't really know how they got introduced to the East Coast, but what we think it was is during a hurricane a couple decades ago in one of the Carolinas, that someone's aquarium broke, or like a zoo's aquarium broke that had lionfish, and it got swept away with the floodwaters. Yeah, so only a couple fish, and now they're all the way, I think some have been spotted in Virginia, all the way down the East Coast into the Caribbean. So very small number took over the world. Now what I want you guys to do is go ahead and pause this video. There should be a pop-up coming up somewhere up here to link you to a YouTube video about the lionfish. Really cool video that you should watch now. And then once you finish watching it, come back to this video. If that pop-up didn't come up, look at your weekly guide. Another example is the zebra mussel. This is a huge detriment, not just to the ecosystem, but for human economy, especially in the Great Lakes area. So this was accidentally introduced through ballast water. If you're not familiar with ballast water, essentially when you have a boat, think of like a cargo boat, not like your rowboat. So here we have this huge barge, and here's the water line. So in really big boats, if they have no cargo on them, what they do is they will take in water and they fill in their ballast. So they are literally sinking their ship. And that's just because they have no weight on the top to weigh it down. So what will happen is, let's say this is a ship in, I don't know, in Japan. It was from the United States, it went to Japan, delivered goods, and now it's coming back to the United States. While it was in Japan, it took in water because it had no cargo. And it comes all the way back to the United States, and here in Detroit, for example, they're loading a whole bunch of cars on here. Tons of shipping containers with tons of cars. All right, well, the ship's getting heavier now. You don't want this water anymore. So what they do is they empty the water. We now have weight that's weighting the boat down. Well, this water was Japan water. And what's in that Japan water? Japan's organisms. Now, there's not like sharks or something in it, but small things like these small little mussels, or different types of bacteria or insects or eggs of things could be in that water. So this water that was on a ship from Japan is now being emptied into the Great Lakes. So that's what I mean by ballast water. There's actually been a lot of non-native species introduced through this mechanism. So what happens with the zebra mussels? Why do we care? Zebra mussels cover everything. So we'll talk about this map in a second. But here is like a boat rudder just covered in zebra mussels. So this is just leaving your boat in the water. This is going to make the motor or the engine not work, or work very poorly. So you have to spend time cleaning it, maybe even replace it. So that's a financial cost. Thinking about organisms that we eat, I mean, this crayfish is covered in zebra mussels. This is something we eat. The biggest problem has been with pipes and other infrastructure. So the zebra mussels get inside and are coating these pipes, leading to blockages, which leads to like a whole replacement of these piping systems, which are typically in the mud and underwater and incredibly costly. This map is showing you where the zebra mussel was originally introduced, which was up here in the Great Lakes. All these other red dots you're seeing are along rivers. People are transporting them on their boats on accident. They might have small larvae on their boats that are now being transported to other waterways. So you can see how much it's spread. So it's going into the 2000s. It's going and going from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. And it started right here. That's where it started. And about 20, 30 years later, across the entire United States. One of my favorites, just because it's really cool, is the Asian carp. Also an accidental release. Not entirely sure how it made its way here, but it's called the Asian carp because it's from Asia. These are like flying fish. Not like the actual flying fish, the species. These fish just fly. They jump out of the water when they're startled, and that's what you see here. They reproduce incredibly fast, and they grow very, very fast. So fast that we really don't have a natural predator that can eat them once they reach mature size. In Asia, that's not a problem. They've got those organisms. We don't here. So pause this video, take a look at this YouTube video. It kind of shows you this really cool behavior they have with this jumping out, and talks a little bit about how they've been invasive also in the Great Lakes area. Once you're done watching this video, come back and watch the rest of the lecture. The cane toad, not our problem in the United States. This is Australia's problem. This guy was introduced on purpose, and you see how big he is. So the reason the cane toad was introduced in Australia, cane for sugar cane, in Australia they have a huge sugar cane, not ecosystem, but sugar cane economy. So grow tons and tons of this stuff. And they were having this problem with beetles, cane beetle. That was decimating their sugarcane crops. Well, if this is your main cash crop and it's being destroyed, you want to do what you can to get rid of that infestation. So they brought over the cane toad because it eats cane beetles. It didn't. It didn't. When it was in this brand new ecosystem, it was exposed to so many foods that it didn't have in its original habitat. So it didn't eat the beetle, it ate everything else. It was eating like other frogs, which frogs and lizards have huge impacts on the environment, particularly frogs. It's eating everything. It's eating mice and rats, which is, kind of good. But it's eating everything except the beetles. The fact that it was eating everything wasn't that big of a deal. Granted, you can imagine how much they're eating. I mean, look how big this thing is. It also kills anything that tries to eat it. This cane toad makes a poison through its skin. And anything that tries to eat it, so think about your pets, cats and dogs love messing with stuff, it would kill them because those organisms weren't used to this. Also means there were no natural predators in Australia to even keep their population in check because nothing is used to this poison. Nothing can process that poison. And again, this was brought over on purpose as a form of biological control. So instead of dousing their fields in pesticides, they decided to use an organism, this cane toad, in order to control that population. Well, it didn't work. Not to say it could never work, but it didn't here. And now they have an even bigger ecological problem. Their sugarcane is still screwed, and now they have all these toads everywhere, killing everything, and things are being killed by it. So biological control, not always the best course of action.